welcome aboard.
Thank you. Okay, so since we already had the planner, right? Do you think we should start off with the objectives now, why I believe God exists, and then we can go then to you with contradictions, morality of the Bible, and then later we finish off with why I believe the Bible is the Word of God?
Yeah, I love all those topics. Well, first of all, what's your first name?
Brandon.
Brandon. Perfect. I'm Jed.
Okay.
Right on. Yeah, so I'm happy to dive right in. Let's start with evidence for God. If you want to give a case for why you think your God exists.
Perfect. So like I said, before we can even get to Christianity, I think we have to first prove that there's a almighty, all-powerful God, correct? So first piece of evidence I'd like to use is that life on earth comes from life. There's not an organism or an animal or a plant that's living that you can name that proceeds from a non-living thing. That would be my first objective. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to answer that real quick?
Yeah, so you're basically saying abiogenesis is impossible, therefore
No.
a God magically created life.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how you could possibly rule out abiogenesis. Although we don't know the exact mechanism that abiogenesis happened, we know that amino acids do occur naturally. We found every amino acid that's necessary for life in nature, on Earth, and on asteroids. It's possible that abiogenesis happens all the time, and we're just not able to detect it because it's resulting in a microorganism that gets gobbled up by some other organism before we even have a chance to find it. So.
Okay, well, my objective to that would be if abiogenesis, abonogenesis is real, correct? We would be able to see a visible chain reaction from, since the Big Bang, of course, non-living molecular compact creating life, we would be able to see a visible chain of non-living things. That's why I asked you, you can't name an organism or a plant or animal that's living that came from a non-living thing. I just believe that if abiogenesis was really true, there would be a visible chain reaction to see that, regardless of how old it would be.
We don't know what the exact mechanism is, but just because we don't know exactly how abiogenesis happened does not mean we're justified in making up our own explanation, like
No, but
God created life.
But then it could be 50-50 then. I could be wrong or you could be wrong.
Let's say for the time being, we don't know how life started. Is that fair?
We could go with that then.
Okay.
All right, number 2. I do want to point out order and design. Of course, everybody knows the argument for order and design. I just want to hear your counter argument to that. For example, one would be the sun. If the sun, everybody knows if it was any hotter or less hotter, it wouldn't be compatible for Earth.
No, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. So I don't know off the top of my head how hot the sun is, but let's say the sun was 5 degrees warmer. Would that destroy the entire Earth? I don't think so. Plus, the sun actually does undergo solar flares, which drastically increase the amount of heat that it produces. So depending on the time of day, the sun might be producing more or less heat. So there's a range inside of which the sun's heat can support life.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily fine-tuned to one exact degree. It's a range.
Do you agree that anything that we have in our solar system is perfect tuning?
Is anything in our solar system perfect tuning? No, definitely not.
No. Okay.
For example,
did you know?
Yes. I was gonna also give an example. Oftentimes with the design argument, we'll hear the distance Earth is away from the sun is perfect to support life. But that ignores the fact that the Earth's distance away from the sun actually varies throughout a year by about 6 million miles. So there's a big range, I think it's called the inhabitable zone, where planets can be away from a star and support life. So there's always a range inside which we can expect to find life. And we find other planets in other galaxies that are inside the inhabitable zone. They're just so far away that we can't tell if there's life on them or not.
Do you have 100% proof that we live in a solar system that there's could be the possibility of other galaxies?
Do I have certainty we live in a solar system with other galaxies? I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm sorry. I said, do we have 100% evidence that there could be a possibility of other galaxies?
Yes, we know for sure. Well,
For sure.
let me back up. Within
Okay.
science, we never have absolute certainty about anything, but
Of course.
we're
Yeah.
maximally certain that, as certain as we can be about anything, that other galaxies do exist and we can observe them.
We can observe it how?
Through telescopes, we can see other galaxies from Earth.
From Earth?
Uh-huh. Yeah, we sure can.
Okay. Now, I have a question for you, right?
Okay.
A human person. We have a conscious mind, 4 senses. We have the eye. I don't know if you ever seen
At least,
yes,
we have at least 5 senses.
at least 5 senses. Yes. I don't know. I don't know if you ever seen the design of an eye. Like the design of an eye is very complex, super complex. But that my question to you is, how do you think a non-living debris or compact would have created something so complex as us? How do you think that's possible?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're appealing to the irreducible complexity argument, where human eyes are so complex that they can never evolve from a simple eye or no eye at all. Is that what you're getting
Well,
at?
it wasn't just the human eye. I'm just saying it was just an example, but there's a lot of examples of complexity of the design of us. For example, our 5 senses, the way that the eye is built around is just more. I was just providing more of an example of how complex a human is.
Sure. So within the animal kingdom, within organisms, we find a myriad of different eyes. So we find eyes that are as complex as ours, and a slow and steady gradient all the way down to no eyes. So we have organisms with no eyes at all, no sense of sight. We have organisms that have a light sensitive patch somewhere on their body where they can only tell if it's light or dark. We have organisms that have really simple eyesight or a pinhole eye. And then we have organisms that have more complex eyes. We have our eyes. And then there's animals with eyes that are way better than ours, like eagles, for example, or owls, who can see in the dark or see way farther than we can. So there's a huge range of eyes, even amongst organisms right now. So it's not hard to imagine a steady and gradual increase in complexity over time within evolution.
Okay. Okay, and then last one before, obviously, we're going to go to the morality and the contradiction of the Bible. Last one is everything. You could disagree on this one, but I would say everything that we have currently, if you want to exclude the beginning of the universe, everything has a cause or has a cause to begin with. Would you agree on that? If we're going to exclude
Say it one more time.
If we're going to exclude the creation or the beginning, do you believe that everything we have after that has a cause to begin with?
Does everything have a cause for its existence?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Sure. Now I know the argument people like to say, well, that this is a stupid argument because then the beginning, if it has a cause, then what's the cause of God? That wouldn't be a contradiction necessarily because the beginning could have a non-cause cause. The cause prior to the cause does not have a cause. Therefore, the universe would have a cause.
So it sounds like special pleading. Everything needs a cause except for the God who caused everything else that you're positing.
Because then the creator would be eternal. No, if there was a creator, then he would be eternal. Which is why
we don't necessarily know that the universe had a beginning in the sense that we would imagine it. So the universe may have always existed in some form. Now, the Big Bang posits that our local presentation of the universe as we perceive it, began about 13.8 billion years ago. But we have no idea if matter and energy have always existed, for eternally in the past, or if time itself began with the existence of a singularity already in existence. We have no idea. So I don't think it's fair to say that the universe necessarily had a beginning or came into existence. We have no idea.
But if then that argument, if you said that possibly the universe could have always existed, what is the problem with saying that a being could have always existed?
There's no evidence for it.
But would there be a problem? Let's say there was evidence for it. Would there be a problem for it being always existed or existing?
You're asking, is it self-contradictory for a being to always exist? Maybe not. Maybe there could be a being that's eternal, but every bit of evidence we have for beings or conscious agents suggests that they start existing and then cease to exist. Every example we have of life, humans, for example, animals, everything we can point to that's alive, starts existing and then stops existing. It begins to be alive, then it stops to be alive. So to posit that there's some being that has a conscious mind who has always existed, we just have no evidence for it.
We have evidence for it. It's just not, we don't have 100% proof because, like you said earlier, not everything, we don't have 100% proof of everything. We just have evidence that we use to point to arguments.
Well, I'm not necessarily demanding 100% proof of God, but I'm not aware of any evidence that this God exists. And so far, everything that you've brought up doesn't actually point to a God. It seems to rely a lot on fallacies, like the argument from ignorance fallacy. For example, with irreducible complexity, seems like the argument stems from, we don't know how complexity arose, therefore a God must have tinkered with evolution, or we don't know what the explanation for the universe is, therefore a God did it. So we're just inventing an explanation for a phenomenon that we don't yet have an understanding of. But in the with the case for evolution, we do have an understanding of it.
Okay. We could now we can move on to the morality and contradictions of the Bible.
Well, I don't know if I'm necessarily satisfied with your evidence for God. I mean, so let's say that we have no idea where life came from. We have no idea why the universe seems to be ordered in such a way to support life. We have no idea why the sun is the temperature it is. We have no idea how evolution happens, and we have no idea how the universe started. How does that get us to God? If we have no idea, then that's just an argument.
If we have no idea, then it can't. But we have an idea. We have an understanding. Nobody's saying that we don't.
If you're going to posit that God is the explanation, we need positive evidence that God is the explanation. The fact that we're lacking in an explanation does not mean we're justified in making up an explanation like God.
I know, because that's not a good argument saying that, well, we don't have an explanation for it, so we're just going to throw in God there. That's not what I typically do. That's a bad explanation of how everything came around.
Okay, yeah, well, good, I agree. So then when it comes to, say, like the Kalam cosmological argument, the universe started existing, therefore God, how do you get to God from the universe started to exist?
Well, I would just, in that question, I would just go back to, if the universe began to exist, then there must be a cause for it. And then we go back to the argument that we were just having. Then you would tell me, then God needs a cause.
Well, you skipped a step. If the universe needs a cause, how do you know that that cause is God?
The universe has a cause. Because if the universe has a cause, something that's lifeless, because obviously space, the body of space isn't living. I want to say it's living, right? It's not like a living being.
Right.
Then it cannot give itself a cause.
Because the body of space is not living, it cannot give itself a cause.
It cannot give itself an own cause.
Let's say that the cause of the universe is external to the universe. Like, if I was willing to grant that for the sake of argument, how does that get us to God? Couldn't there be a cause other than God that's outside the universe?
Not that I know of.
Well,
if you would like,
just because you don't know of it doesn't mean that there isn't a possible explanation.
Well, what explanation would you give?
I have no idea. I don't know how the universe started. But it seems like you don't either, but you're just using God as a fill-in for the gap. We have a gap in our knowledge of how the universe started, and we're plugging God in. That's what it sounds like we're doing.
But just earlier ago, you said we don't know you said the explanation of abiogenesis. Is that what you said? I'm sorry if I'm quoting you wrong.
Yeah, to my best understanding, we don't know the exact mechanism of abiogenesis. We don't know how non-living material became alive. We know that amino acids do occur naturally. They can form on their own, but we don't know how they started to self-replicate. We don't know the exact process.
Okay.
But does that mean we're justified in believing a God is responsible?
No, it's not justified. I just think that if the Big Bang created life from, or it could have been that life already had to exist, and then right non-living compacts created what we have now. I just don't think it's logical for us to believe that, right? And then there's not a visible chain that we see. Okay, well, this organism created life and it's non-living, or etc. I think there would be a visible chain reaction of non-living things creating living things, but we don't see that in day to day, or in history.
Well, the Big Bang didn't create life. The Big Bang is the start of the expansion of the universe. But just because we don't know what the mechanism of abiogenesis is doesn't mean that we get to assume that there's a guy outside of space and time who magically created people or magically created the first organism.
Okay. And
it sounds like a big God of the gaps argument to me. We don't know how any of this stuff happened, therefore God did it.
Well, it's not necessarily that we don't know. It's just, I think I keep saying the same thing. I'm sorry, but I just think that, again, if we trace it all the way back to something that's non-living, that we have that created living things like us, why isn't there a chain reaction that we can see of organisms that we can name with scientific data that created living things?
Well, I wouldn't use the word created because that smuggles in the idea that some conscious agent is responsible for the first life. We do have a pretty good idea of the series of evolution, the sequence of evolution. So we can trace back life on Earth now, through billions of years into the past, from the complex life that we have now. And, you go back in time far enough, we have really simple, probably single cell organisms, and then before that, we don't know. We don't know what the explanation of abiogenesis is. But I'm saying just because we don't know doesn't mean we're justified in assuming a God is responsible for it.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm happy to admit all this stuff that I don't know. I have no idea how the universe started. I have no idea how abiogenesis took place. I don't know why the sun is the temperature that it is. If I had to speculate on the sun, it would be that the size of the sun is a big determining factor of the heat that it produces. Bigger stars produce more heat because they undergo more nuclear fusion. But there might be more things at play there. I'm not a cosmologist, so I'm not going to pretend to have a huge understanding of that. But if you're prepared to move on from existence of God, I think we've covered it maybe as much as we can.
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay, so yeah, the next thing you wanted to talk about was morality. So did you want to start somewhere?
You can start it off.
Sure. Well, why don't we start with a definition of morality? So I define morals as basically opinions on how people should act. Moral actions are generally those which enhance and promote well-being, health, and happiness. Immoral actions are those which cause unnecessary harm and suffering. Would you agree with that definition?
Totally.
Great. Cool. So when it comes to morality, would you say that the God of the Bible is moral? Does he prioritize the well-being of thinking creatures?
Yes.
Well, that's perfect because I disagree. So let's go from there. So I would consider killing someone a detriment to their well-being. Would you agree with that?
Depends on the killing.
Okay. Depends on the killing. Could you name for me an instance when killing someone is in their best interest?
Self-defense.
Well, if it's self-defense, it's in your own best interest, but it's still not in the best interest of the person you're killing, right?
Not in the person that you're killing, but in your own interest it would be.
Sure. So in some situations, if my best interest comes in conflict with someone else's best interest, if they're trying to kill me, most people would agree that I'm justified in defending myself. And I'm happy to agree with that. Now, what about a situation where I kill someone who is not trying to hurt me at all? Is that justified?
No.
Okay, great. So when God kills babies in the Bible, you would agree that that's immoral because those babies have no intention or ability to harm God.
This is the one a lot of people use. So you're referring to when God, I'm pretty sure it's one of the plagues where he kills all the firstborns of Egypt.
That's one of them.
Correct.
Yeah, in Exodus
Correct.
11. Sure.
Correct. Okay. Now let me explain to you why I believe this is moral now.
Okay.
Number one, this is the biggest argument that people do not understand, right? Babies, every baby, regardless of what they did, regardless of how they acted, regardless of their parents, every baby, if it dies as a baby, it's automatically going to go to heaven. But I'm not justifying killing of babies. That's just my first thing I wanted to point out here. Every baby, regardless of how old or what it did in its lifetime, because it does not have a conscience, it does not know what it's doing, it's going to go to heaven. Just wanted to make that point clear.
Okay.
Second, I've made a lot of responses to this. God, the God of the Bible, he gave the Pharaoh a lot of warnings. Do you condemn slavery?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. The Exodus story, the Egypts, we don't know how long they enslaved the Israelites. They enslaved the Israelites for God knows how long. Now, when the God addressed this issue, he got his prophet, Moses, and he wanted Moses to address the issue to the Pharaoh. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, any Christians, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 times the warning. And Egypt was a country very known for its idolatry, its pagan worship, and it's in slavery. So when God had these plagues, it was not for a cause absurd. We all agree that we don't like slavery, correct? We all agree that
not all of us. God thinks slavery is okay sometimes.
Well, we can get to that later.
Sure.
But most of us, okay, humans, we condemn slavery, of course. So I don't think the argument that God killed babies for no reason, I don't think you should throw in there in the Exodus story.
So just to make sure I'm understanding you clearly,
yes.
God is justified in killing babies for 3 major reasons. Babies go straight to heaven, so it's not really an inconvenience to them. God warned Pharaoh to stop enslaving the Israelites, and he warned him multiple times, and he refused.
Yes.
And slavery is very immoral.
Yes.
Okay, now, is there any way God could have ended the slavery in Egypt without killing babies?
He could have, but he decided not to.
So if God could have accomplished the same goal without the death of innocent lives, then wouldn't that be the better option?
Because but the problem is he wanted the Pharaoh to do it with his own will. Because if God just allows people to stop killing because, without the argument of free will, then everybody would be like a robot, I'd say, like a robot. So he wanted the Pharaoh, with his free will, to stop the slavery. God could have easily, of course, I agree, I believe God is all-powerful. He could have obviously stopped the slavery. He just wanted the Pharaoh to stop with his slavery against the Jews. I'm going to call them the Jews. I know in the Bible and Exodus they're not really called Jews here, but he wanted the Jews to be saved. But he doesn't want himself to just allow it to happen, because then there's no free will there.
Okay, so I got to pause you really quick, because in the story of Exodus, Pharaoh wanted to let the Israelites go, and God violated his free will and forced him to keep the Israelites as slaves longer. In Exodus 9:12, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. This is right after the 6th plague. So the implication here is that God wanted to show off just 4 more plagues. Pharaoh was already happy or willing to allow the Israelites to go free, But God said, no, 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 I'm not done creating suffering, and I haven't killed any babies yet. So God needed to wait till he got to the 10th plague so he could kill all these babies first. Then he could allow Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But until then, he violated Pharaoh's free will by hardening his heart.
You said Exodus chapter 9, verse 12, correct?
Yes.
Could you read it out loud?
Yeah. Give me just 1 second. I had it written down in a note, and okay. Exodus 9, verse 12. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses.
Okay, good. So, number one, I just want to point out the explanation that you gave, that the Pharaoh wanted to already release the Israelites, but God did not want him to. That's not in the verse or in the chapter. You're using your own interpretation based off what the verse says. It doesn't say that.
What does it mean when it says the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart?
It means that he allowed the Pharaoh's heart to be hardened because the Pharaoh already hardened his own heart.
So when it says the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, you're taking away God's autonomy, and you're taking away responsibility from God by saying God just passively allowed it to happen.
He allowed it to happen.
Right.
Because
so the verse
if
says
you read the context before the chapter, you're going to see that the Pharaoh obviously hardened his own heart, rejecting God's prophet.
Yeah, up until then, it does say that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, but then in this verse, it changes to God hardens Pharaoh's heart.
Because you can use the two verses. You can use it. I'm sorry.
I was just asking, what's the difference between Pharaoh hardening his heart and God hardening Pharaoh's heart? Why does the language shift? What's different about it now?
Because you can use the two verses to find out an ultimate conclusion. The Pharaoh hardened his own heart because of his own actions, and God allowed the Pharaoh for his heart to harden. It's just like when the Bible, it says, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it says, and God deceived. It's something about the prophets. It's not him literally doing the action to the prophets. It's the prophets declaring it with their mouths, and God allowing. He's taking the responsibility. Oh, me. But it's not Yahweh literally doing it. Because if we read, I'm sorry, we're going back to Exodus. It clearly says, if you read what the Pharaoh did, and the verse that you just said, you said that the Pharaoh hardened his own heart. You can come to the ultimate conclusion that the Pharaoh hardened his heart from the actions that we see before the chapter 8, and God is taking the responsibility because he allowed the Pharaoh's heart to be hardened, and he's saying, I, the Lord, hardened his heart.
This is I call it an excuse. That's not meant to be derogatory, but I see this excuse from Christians a lot, where anytime we can find an action that God does in the Bible that's immoral or reprehensible or a violation of someone's free will, the Christian, the apologist, will try to remove responsibility from God. That even though it says God is responsible for this,
that's God taking the responsibility.
What it means.
If that's your answer, then that's your question. God is taking responsibility right there. He says, and I, the Lord, hardened the Pharaoh's heart. Taking responsibility.
To me, that sounds like a violation of Pharaoh's free will. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, as if he would have let him go.
If you keep reading, you'll see that the Pharaoh hardened his own heart.
He did that
and
prior.
Then you'll realize with the context that God allowed Pharaoh's heart to be hardened. But he's the one that hardened his own heart.
In the earlier plagues, Pharaoh's heart was hardened because of Pharaoh, but from his own free will. But then starting in verse 12, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. But we can move on from verse 12 and get off of free will and back to killing babies. So here's another question. If God was willing to kill innocent lives for the sake of making the Israelites free, why didn't God just kill Pharaoh? One person could die, and the person who's ultimately responsible for enslaving the Israelites, instead of killing who knows how many hundreds or thousands of innocent lives.
Because God knew that's the only thing that, I'm sorry, not the only thing. God knew that that's something that would have touched the Pharaoh's heart in that moment. And seeing his firstborn son die, he was ultimately going to tell Moses, okay, I believe you're God. Get out of here, and your people can go.
So God would rather kill an innocent baby in order to coerce someone to let slaves go free instead of just killing the slave master to let the slaves go free.
But then you have the problem with, it's not only the Pharaoh that's in charge of Israel, brother. Israel, they have princes, they have other people who watch over the Jews. It's not only the Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we scroll down to Exodus 14:4, it's another instance where God, I would claim, God violates Pharaoh's free will, where Pharaoh brings all of his Egyptian cohorts in a chase after the Israelites. This is where God creates the giant walls of water, splits the Red Sea, and then the Israelites can walk through. God drowns all the Egyptian slave masters anyway. So if God was willing to kill all the Egyptian slave masters, then why didn't he just do that at the very beginning, and then the Israelites could just leave?
You said Exodus chapter 4?
14:4. I can read it for you if you like.
14:4. Read it.
This is God speaking, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this.
This is after, correct me if I'm wrong, this is after it says the chapter where the Pharaoh hardened his own heart?
Yes, yeah, this is after that chapter. This is after the Israelites were already free and on their way to freedom. And then God actually turned them around back towards Egypt. And then he violated Pharaoh's free will to make him chase after them so that he could do a big finale, like a big grand, let's kill all the Egyptians. And then they'll know that I'm the real God. Where he could have just killed them from the very beginning if he knew he was going to kill all the Egyptians ahead of time. He could have done that way back at the very beginning of Exodus. And then all the Israelites could have just gone free without the plagues and without all these babies dying.
Well, if you read from verse chapter 14, because unlike atheists, I'm nowhere in trying to offend anybody here. Christians, we like to read the context or the chapter. So starting from chapter 1, the Lord gave them instructions to Moses, order the Israelites to turn back by Pi Thear between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore across the Baal Zephon. Like I said, this is after Pharaoh released them. Obviously, You see verse 2? Okay. Then look at verse 3 now. Then the Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused, they are trapped in the wilderness. And then we get to verse 4, and I once again will harden the Pharaoh's heart. He will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites camped there as they were told. It clearly shows that in between verse 3 and 4, it shows that the Pharaoh already had the intention to chase them. If you read from verse 4 to verse 3 to 4, you're going to see he already had the intention to.
So if Pharaoh, well, first of all, the only reason that Pharaoh will think the Israelites are running around in the, well, what it actually says is Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. So Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused, but it doesn't say Pharaoh will plan on attacking the Israelites. That idea is implanted into Pharaoh's mind by God via violation of his free will, when it says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue them.
Okay, verse 3, like I said, we have different translations. Okay,
I'm using NIV, yeah.
I'm using New Living Translation, just for everybody here.
Yeah, that's fine.
But when it says, then the Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused, they're trapped in the wilderness. What is being said right here is to Pharaoh, he's already thinking, okay, the Israelites, they're wandering around in the desert with nobody. Because to this point, I think it's very clear that Pharaoh still wants to worship his pagan idols, does not believe in this hierarchy of a god. So he's in his head, he's thinking, okay, they're wandering around in the wilderness all by themselves. And then in verse 4, it says, and I once again will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. He's going to chase after them. Why? Because he believes that they're wandering around in the wilderness, and this is no problem. And also, and I think we go back to the same argument, and it says, I will harden the Pharaoh's heart. If we saw the first time the hardening of the heart, it was because, like I said, Moses, the Pharaoh, he hardened his own heart, and then Pharaoh, he said, I will harden the Pharaoh's heart, taking responsibility, allowing it to happen. I think we can use the same argument here, but instead we can read the context where it says, and I will think, the Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused and they're trapped in the wilderness. He's already assuming that they're alone, this big group of Israelites in the desert, which would make sense because if you read verse 4, it says, and he will chase after you. He's thinking already in his mind, they're in the wilderness, they're all alone, and then now I'm going to chase them.
Yeah, it seems like the disconnect between your interpretation and mine is that what verse 3 says about Pharaoh's state of mind is that the Israelites are confused, they're trapped in the wilderness. And then that's where God steps in and hardens Pharaoh's heart and makes him chase after them. And he will chase after you after God hardens Pharaoh's heart. So the idea to chase only happened because God put the idea in Pharaoh's head. Not to mention, if we go back to verse 2, the Lord ordered Moses to turn the Israelites back around. It says, turn back and camp by these other places, which are closer to Egypt than they already were. So God took them in the wrong direction just so that he could kill a bunch of people he didn't have to. Who, if he was planning on killing, and my whole point in bringing this passage up is to point out that if God was willing to kill all of the Egyptian slave masters anyway, he should have done that from the very beginning and skipped all 10 of the plagues, because those plagues resulted in the death of innocent people, including babies.
Say that one more time, the last part.
The reason that God wanted to turn the Israelites back around was so that he could kill all the Egyptian slave masters. But he could have, if God knew he was going to kill these Egyptians from the very beginning, he should have skipped all 10 of the plagues and then saved a bunch of innocent lives. He should have just killed the Egyptians from the very beginning, because it accomplishes the same goal and avoids the shedding of innocent baby blood.
Would you agree that, okay, the newborns, would you agree that perhaps maybe 20 humans is more valuable than an entire nation of people?
Is 20 humans more valuable than an entire nation of people?
Yes.
I hesitate to put value on life like that. We could say the more lives that we have, the more valuable it is. So it kind of gets to the trolley problem. Okay. Should we save one or should we save three?
All right. So then why would God then kill more the officials, the princes, the kings? I mean, remember, they were a lot in Egypt at this time. There were like hundreds. Why do you think that's more acceptable, killing all these princes, all these kings, all these workers, instead of killing the newborns?
Well, you said 20, as if there were only 20 newborns in all of Egypt. If I had to speculate, I would say the number of newborns far outnumbers the number of Egyptian officials. Not to mention, many of the Egyptian officials were also firstborns, because you could be an adult and still fall victim to the firstborn plague. If you were the firstborn male in your household, even if you were 50 years old, you were still going to die. So God killed way more people, probably thousands, if not millions, of innocent people and innocent people, when he could have just killed the slave masters, the people that were responsible for enslaving the Israelites.
Another argument that a lot of people like to use, the word firstborn can also mean favoriting. It could have just been the favoriting of a child in Egypt. It doesn't necessarily have to be a baby. It could be a family, and let's say there's 3 children. The firstborn, a lot of times in the Bible, is just the favorite, not implying that it's literally the firstborn.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, if God killed the favorite child and who wasn't always the firstborn, I'd say that's still just as immoral. Here's another option that God could have chosen. He could have frozen all of the Egyptians long enough for the Israelites to just pack up their stuff and walk away. He could have just frozen them in time so that they're frozen, and then when he unfreezes them, all the Israelites are gone.
But then there would be no justice. There would be no justice.
No justice. Well, why doesn't? If God wants justice, then he could. You were just advocating on behalf of the Egyptian officials. You were saying it's better to kill a bunch of babies than to let the slave masters die. So now you're saying the slave masters need to die.
No, I'm saying that there needed to be a justice in Egypt for what they did to Israel, to the Israelites, for, like I said, who knows how long? Could have been thousands of years, could have been hundreds of years. There had to have been a justice, and maybe God's justice could have been a lot more softer than that. Didn't have to be that rough. But it's not my decision to say how his justice should be upon a nation that's enslaving people, that has pagan worships that are far fetched from God.
God could have punished people without killing innocent people, right?
God could have punished people without.
So, like you're saying, there needs to be justice. The slave masters who are responsible for the enslavement of the Israelites, they need to be punished. Maybe that's true. If I grant that, God could have, even an easier option than freezing everybody, God could have just teleported all of the Israelites somewhere else, somewhere safer. He could have just picked them up in a cloud, moved them to some other location magically, or he could have just zapped them and teleported them to some other place. God could have done a number of different things. And then after he did that, he could have also made all the Egyptian slave masters suffer a stroke or some other ailment, or made them suffer in some horrible way without killing any babies.
Well, the Old Testament law says the person who sins will surely die. And clearly the Egyptians, they were committing horrible sins in slavery. That's 100% against the commandments of God. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it's in Exodus.
Oh, yeah, I'll correct you. In fact, that might be a good pivot into the slavery discussion. So you just said slavery is a sin, correct?
Wait. Slavery that you have no will of controlling over. Sometimes the Bible talks about slavery, but it's the person who willingly becomes a slave. So there's a good and there's a bad definition of a slave. Slave can also, that's why many Bible verses, they translate the word slave into servant, because a slave can be somebody who does it willingly or unwillingly. A slave is not all the time somebody who's doing work that's unwillingly.
Okay, so you're going to say that anytime someone is forced to become a slave against their will, that's immoral or a sin.
Yes.
Okay. So let's turn to Deuteronomy 20.
Okay.
I'll pull out the New Living Translation. So if we go to verse 5 through 10, basically this is a method that God gives the Israelites to acquire new slaves, where he says, you can march up to a neighboring city and give them a peace offering. Become our slaves, or else we're going to kill all the men in your city and force the women and children to become slaves anyway, which is slavery against the will of the slave.
You said Deuteronomy 20, correct?
Yeah, Deut 20, 5 through 10. I'm happy to read it if you like. I'm sorry. 10 through 15.
10 through 15.
Yeah, actually, 10 through 14.
10 through 14.
Yeah.
Well, like I said before, context is very important when you're reading the Bible. So I'm going to read from the verse 1. It might be a little bit long, but it's better for everybody to read from verse 1 so we can kind of understand.
I don't want to bog down our discussion by reading a bunch of stuff. Let's read 10 through 14. As you approach a town to attack it, you must first offer its people terms of peace. If they accept your terms and open the gates to you, then all the people inside will serve you in forced labor. But if they refuse to make peace and prepare to fight, you must attack the town. When the Lord your God hands the town over to you, use your swords to kill every man in the town, but you may keep for yourselves all the women, children, livestock, and other plunder. You may enjoy the plunder from your enemies that the Lord your God has given you. So it's an order from God to create forced labor from people that don't want to be slaves. And if they refuse to do forced labor, you kill all the men and then keep for yourself women and children as spoils of war.
Verse 11 where it says forced labor, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Verse 11. I'm going to be reading it from the King James. verse 11. And it shall be,
Um,
if it make it, what were we going to say?
I was just gonna say, oh no, not the King James. That's the worst one. Just
I know
kidding. You can read whatever translation you want.
I agree. It's a bad Bible. I just in my app, the King James is where I have the strong numbers. That's what I was gonna do.
That's fine. Sure.
Okay. And it shall be, if it make an answer of peace and open unto thee, it shall be that the people that is found therein shall be tributarios unto thee, and they shall serve thee. Now, I think the word that forced labor, I'm trying to find it here so I can click on the definition. Now the
Yeah.
words, yes,
I was just gonna say while you're doing that, I'm gonna see if I can find like the Hebrew translation.
perfect.
On the surface level, would you admit that the passage seems problematic?
Well, it's problematic if you like again if you read it from verse 11 and you're reading this, you're like, wow, this is a really big issue. But I was going to say if you read it from the beginning of the chapter, it is talking about when you're going to battle against your enemies, or in other words, people that enemies in the context would be somebody who's waged a war against you.
Well, it does say that when you march up to attack a city, so these aren't cities that are attacking Israel. In this situation, Israel is on the offensive. They're marching up to a city and saying, hey, time to die.
It shall be if you make these open. Well, the word here, I'm pretty. If we go to the Hebrew translation, it says if you make an answer of peace. If you make an answer of peace.
Yeah, I found the Hebrew word that's used in forced labor was the New Living Translation. The Hebrew
Yeah,
word is wa. Oh, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but
that's fine.
um, since I don't read Hebrew, one thing I often do is pull up a verse and then compare all English translations.
That's fine too.
So if we do that and examine what the Bible says about forced labor, the ASV says,
Yes.
people that are found therein shall become tributary unto thee and shall serve thee. Let's see. AMP says forced labor. AMTC says tributary to you and they shall serve you. CSB says forced laborers.
Okay.
It seems like forced laborers seems like most of the translations. ERV says all the people in that city will become your slaves and be forced to work for you. The easy translation says, then all the people in the city will become your slaves to do hard work for you.
Okay.
But it seems like almost all the translations have something in common. They all say something like forced labor that you're doing against your will, or at least you are coerced into doing this labor. We can also turn to some other passages like Exodus 21, which say that you are allowed to beat your slaves with a rod just so long as they don't die within 2 days. And there's no punishment for the slave master for beating their slave so long as they survive the beating.
What is the
Do you have
verse?
the Exodus 21, verse 20 through 21.
All right. You can read it for now.
Yeah, let me pull up the exact verse here. Exodus 21, starting in verse 20. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property.
Okay. Now,
So
like I
here we
said,
have.
what
Well,
were
I
you
was
gonna say?
just gonna summarize by pointing out that here we have the idea that people are property and you can own other people, and there's no punishment for beating them with a rod if they can get up and recover after a day or two. The implication being that you can put them into a bloody, concussed pulp, into a coma on the floor, so long as they wake up. It doesn't matter if they have brain damage or a couple of concussions. That's totally fine as long as they can walk within 2 days.
Okay, so the argument that I used before is that the word slave can be willingly or unwillingly, correct? Now, there's many Bible verses for verse 20 that says a servant, and a servant would be doing the work that is willingly. But if we read from verse 21, verse 20, it says, if a man beats his male or female servant with a club, and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. That's obviously a condemnation to the law. And then verse 21, if the slave owner recovers within a day or two, the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property willingly. But forgetting about that.
Well, not necessarily willingly, if he got the slave as a result of attacking another nation.
And where did you read that at?
That was back in Deuteronomy 20, what we just covered. So you could force someone to become your slave by threatening to kill them or threatening to kill their husband. And then if they, or for whatever reason, it doesn't even say what kind of reason you need. If you just decide, hey, this slave looks like he could use a good beating, then you can just grab a club and start just whacking them over the head until they pass out. And as long as they don't die, there's no punishment whatsoever.
In the Old Testament, servants and slaves were a part of Jewish tradition. Like, for example, the patriarch Abraham, he had a lot of servants.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And they all loved him. And they
How
all
do
were doing,
how do you know that they all loved him?
because the Bible says it.
Can you cite the chapter and verse where it says all of Abraham's slaves loved him?
Well, it's not in those words, but the servants, their actions, shows that they loved Abraham.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. If it seems like that's baseless speculation on your part. Wasn't it Abraham who raped one of his slaves, and then the slave had Ishmael, and then
Well, the Bible, that's something you just add in there. He didn't rape a servant.
Sarah, his wife, Abraham's wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife.
Yes.
So you're right. Sorry, Abraham didn't. It doesn't say that Abraham raped Hagar. It says that Abraham owned an Egyptian slave. So evidently, it's okay for Israelites to own Egyptians as slaves, but it's immoral when Egyptians own Israelites as slaves.
But like I said, the word slave can either mean somebody who does his work willingly or unwillingly.
Yeah, and so it
could be a slave that's working for Abraham. That the slave wants to do it, or a servant. It could be a
slave that wants to be a slave, but it could also be a slave who doesn't want to be a slave, right?
Exactly, depending on the context, yeah.
Sure. So then the Bible condones an immoral form of slavery from your own admission.
Yes.
Because you said that it's immoral if you own a slave and they don't want to be a slave.
Yes.
Okay. Would you take back what you said earlier about slavery, involuntary slavery being a sin?
Involuntarily? Not involuntarily. No, that would 100% be a sin.
But we already went over Deuteronomy 20, which said that you can make someone your slave against their will by threatening them with death.
You said Deuteronomy 20?
Yeah, we already went through this one. That was the one about forced labor, where you can march up and attack a city and threaten them with death if they don't become your slave.
Correct me if I'm wrong, verse 19 to 20, it's an example. There's a lot of versions that say if you're making a peace offer. So if you're making a peace offer, and then later the text says, and then they'll become your slave, I think, rationally you can assume that through the peace offer it's willingly.
I don't think so. So when you
Why
march up
not?
to attack a city, this means that Israel is on the offensive, and then the peace offering, peace in air quotes, is become our slaves, or else we will kill all the men in your city.
Where's the
And
verse
if
at?
you say, okay, we'll become your slaves, that's not really,
Where's the
I mean,
verse?
that's coercion. Sorry, what was that?
What was the verse again?
Deuteronomy 20, 10 through
Yes.
15. And sorry for bringing this back up. I know we just went through it, but
No, that's
um,
completely normal. Okay, you said verse 15?
10 through 15. So you
10
march
through
up to
15.
God says you can march up and attack a city and then offer them to either become slaves or die. And then once they agree to be your slave, well, some of them might still say, no, I don't want to be your slave. And then you say, okay, I'm going to kill your husband. And then since you're just a powerless woman, I'm going to make you my slave anyway. And so then this woman who's become a slave against her will, you can beat with a rod so long as she doesn't die within 2 days. And that's completely within the guidelines of the Bible and not a sin because God expressly allowed it.
If you approach to a town to attack it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you wage the war, the big conflict. We're looking at the bigger scheme, not the little scheme. If you approach a town to attack it, it can also mean that it doesn't necessarily mean 100% of the time that you're the one that waged the war
Okay,
or the battle.
that's fair.
And we know that. And if you're reading from verse 1, it says that this is your enemies who wage war against you.
In verse 1,
Reading from verse 1, yes.
it says, when you go to war against your enemies.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the enemies are the ones who started the war.
But keep reading the verse 1. Keep reading the verse 1.
When you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, do not be afraid of them because the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt will be with you.
Now
So in
read
other
verse
words,
3.
God is going to be
Now read verse 3.
God's going to be rigging the war in your favor, so you don't need to be afraid.
Yes. Now
Verse
verse 3.
3.
Read verse 3.
He shall say, hear Israel, today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory.
Now,
But
if they're
nothing in that.
afraid, what makes you think that they waged the war? If they're panicking and they're trembling, what makes you think that they waged this war?
Maybe God told them to because they're in the promised land. Hey, you're in
Okay,
our land, so that we're gonna go ahead and kill you. Even though you're bigger than us, you're seemingly more powerful than us. We have a magical God who's going to help us kill you.
but if they're waging the war, they wouldn't be afraid or panicking if they have the God of Israel.
Not necessarily. So an army, the Israelites' army is full of many people. So some people in the army might be afraid. If I was in an army, even if I was in the bigger army, I would still be afraid of dying. So I think it's
Well, in
only
verse
human
3 it
nature.
says, in verse 3 it says, "Listen to me, all of you men of Israel. Do not be afraid as you go out to fight your enemies today. Do not lose heart or panic or tremble before them." It's
So that's an
the
order
word there, it
from
says all.
an order from God to not be afraid doesn't necessarily mean everyone was afraid. He's prohibiting a future behavior, not necessarily saying they they're not. Sorry, I have there's a pop-up that says 20 seconds remaining. I don't know if that means I'm going to get kicked off the stream in 20 seconds. I hope not. Future Jed here. Yeah, that's exactly what it means. Instagram limits live streams to 1 hour. So I'm just going to stitch together our different live streams as one cohesive video. Now, back to the debate. We were talking about slavery. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to go over about slavery before we moved on to a different topic.
Well, I was just saying that in Deuteronomy chapter 20, we can't just assume that this is Israel making the big conflict here. We can't just go ahead and assume that by reading the words that you come up to a town, or that we're going into battle, that these words are indicating that it's Israel that's starting the war.
I agree. We can't assume that, but we also can't assume that these other nations are waging war against Israel. We don't know who started the war.
Correct.
Now, whether Israel started the war or not, do you think it's moral to make everyone in the city a slave against their will?
Mm, no, I don't think so.
Okay, great. I agree. So then we're in agreement that God is advocating for immoral behavior.
Well, if we read the verse 12 again, it says, verse 11. Verse 10, I'm sorry, I keep going back to the verses. Verse 10, if you approach a town to attack it, we already went over this. We have no idea who started the war or not, correct?
Sure.
Then we move. You must first offer the people terms for peace. Now, already here, this is already signifying this is God's command to the Israelites when they're going to battle. This isn't something that the other nations are doing now. Seems like something only the Bible is telling Israel to do. When you first attack, make an offer for peace.
Now, the peace that God is telling them to offer involves becoming a slave or dying. Does that really sound like peace to you?
Well, it doesn't say that they would die if they didn't accept it.
It says that you either have to become our slaves or else we're going to kill all of the men. We're going to take a sword and stab all the men in your city and then force the women and children to be slaves anyway and take them as plunder for ourselves. So it's literally become a slave or die. If you're a man, you get the luxury of the option of dying. If you're a woman or a child, you just have to become a slave no matter what. Why couldn't God advocate for actual peace and harmony? Like, hey, there's another nation. You guys are at conflict with each other. Let's solve this diplomatically. No one has to die. Let's make everyone one nation. Why don't we just make the Israelites and the Canaanites? We can live in harmony together. It doesn't matter if we serve different gods. We can have freedom of religion. We can all live under the same big country. We can call it Israel, Canaan, or I don't know, some other name. Just one giant country where everyone lives and gets along with each other. And maybe God could say, if you're not interested in playing nice with the people around you, then I'm going to step in and make sure that you do through force. So God could ensure people behave well and treat each other nicely, but instead he advocates for killing and enslavement.
The Hebrew word for forced is mamis. It means it could be a taxation, it could be being a master to, or it could be a tribute. It's the Hebrew word for it.
Okay, so in this situation, in Deuteronomy 20, when it says, make everyone subject to forced labor,
Yes.
that would be, you're going to be the masters of them. They're going to be your slaves, and you'll be the masters, and they'll be forced to do work against their will.
If we're not using the word force and we're using the Hebrew context of it.
Sure. Yeah, so I would say that everything that Deuteronomy 20 advocates for, killing people if they refuse to become your slave, making them a slave against their will, it's all grossly immoral. Now, if we do scroll down, here's another passage I'd love to talk about. This one's short, just verses 16 through 17. This is a couple of cities that do not get offered the luxury of becoming slaves. God wants the Israelites to kill all of them, no questions asked. He says, completely destroy them. Leave alive nothing that breathes. The Canaanites, Ammonites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, Hittites, they all just die. Children, animals, everyone gets a spear through their gut or a knife across their throat. God wants all these people to die. Is that moral?
The Horites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I'm sorry if I pronounce any of that wrong. They're really complicated names. But all these towns in the Bible, they are recorded of I only know the Amorites and the Canaanites that attacked Israel first, and then God not taking the action right there used his vengeance in this verse. I'm not sure for the other three countries or nations of people here. I'm only aware of the Amorites and the Canaanites that attacked Israel first in some period of time, and then Israel attacking back. So then, with that, I would just assume that the other ones, right, would fall into that category as well.
Does it matter if they started the war? Is it still okay to kill babies and animals?
Well,
Let's
it
say
doesn't
that.
say. Keep going.
No, what were you going to say?
I said it doesn't say in those words babies and animals.
It says, do not keep alive anything that breathes. Babies
Anything that
breathe,
breathes.
animals breathe,
I
right?
I agree. If you're going to war with somebody and somebody wages a war against you, you should not give them no breaks, no stops, and you should have complete and utterly destroy everything.
So if Canada wages war against the US, you would advocate for our soldiers to go to their country and start killing civilians, women, children, innocent men in their homes, people that have no desire to be a part of the war. You just want everyone in the country to die because the government decided to start a war.
Well, there shouldn't be mercy upon the country. That's what I'm getting at.
I thought God was all about mercy.
God
So you're
is
saying
the God of the Bible is
if a country wages war against us, then we should kill every single civilian in that country. No questions asked.
yes.
Yikes. Well, no offense, but I'm glad that you're not our president.
That's fine.
You would just drop bombs everywhere.
I wouldn't show them any mercy. They're coming into our country. They're waging war. They're killing. They're killing. Because remember, um, in the Bible, the Amorites and the Canaanites, it was when Israel they were walking in their path, and without the Israelites knowing, they attacked from behind. I don't know if you know this story. It's in the Bible, and they killed a lot of the Israelites. So present, if we're taking that in a modern day society, I think it would be acceptable in that matter to not have any repulse for the civilians or anything that's in the country.
Yeah, I have to strongly disagree. I think that if a government wages war against me or my tribe or my country, then I should absolutely not go around killing a bunch of innocent children. I mean, that's horrible to me. You're advocating for killing innocent people that may be against the war. I mean, with any war, if Canada wages war against the US, I'm sure there's going to be people in Canada who are outspoken against the war that you would advocate to kill them anyway because they happen to live in Canada.
But how do you know when God expresses this when He says kill everything that breathes? How do you know it's not supposed to be? You're not supposed to take it literal as kill literally everything that breathes. It could just be, for example, it could just be show them kill everything that you encounter that comes in conflict with you. How do you know it literally means kill everything in a literal sense? How do you know God is trying to imply that?
Well, because that's exactly what it says. Completely destroy them, leave alive nothing that breathes. So why on earth, if God gave me a direct and explicit command, why would I assume that he was just joking around? If
I
God
wouldn't say
says,
just joking. It could have been a different way he was trying to express it. It could have been metaphorically.
it seems
The
like a
killing is still
really,
happening. The killing
God
is still
seems,
happening.
God seems like an incredibly bad communicator. If he's telling his Israelites to kill people and he doesn't actually mean it, he's saying, go and completely wipe out these 6 tribes, kill every single thing that breathes, including livestock, but but you're saying he's just joking. One thing that we could look at too, if we read on to verse 19, it says, when you lay siege to the city for a long time, fighting against it, capture it, do not destroy its trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat their fruit. So the only thing that we want to spare in these cities is trees. No mention of animals or livestock, no mention of babies. It's specific. The only thing it says not to kill is fruit trees, because they can serve as benefits to yourself, which animals could too. So it's a little weird that God thinks it's okay to kill their livestock, but not their trees, their fruit. But I see no reason to think that God would command the killing of someone, but then not really mean it. How can we be sure what God means when he tells us anything? When God says, that he should be the only, have no other gods before me, maybe he's just kind of joking and he thinks it's okay to have one or two gods before him, but just not more than three.
Well, in that context, the one that you just provided is when he saved Israel from the slavery. So he's telling them there was no other God that was there when that happened. You should have no other God before me, because Israel was known for their, again, they also made idols. Like, you know the bull story? They made the,
Yeah, the golden calf.
yes.
Well,
The gold
God,
calf.
to my knowledge, in Exodus, God never says there are no other gods besides me. In fact, God acknowledges the existence of other gods and says, I'm the
yes,
only one you're allowed to worship.
I'm a henotheist. I believe there's other gods. I just don't.
Oh,
I know the
really?
existence. I know I know the existence of the gods, but I only believe in one God.
When you say henotheist, I have to admit I've never heard that term. Can you expand on that more?
It's where you understand the knowledge of other gods. For example, there's a psalm that says that humans are gods. There's a psalm that says that. It's the knowledge of gods, but you only believe and serve one God. You're not denying that there's other gods in the Bible. You just only believe in one certain God.
So, like, do you think that Moloch and Baal, these other gods in the Old Testament, they're real supernatural entities who are just lesser gods or little g gods compared to Yahweh?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, interesting. There's some, my understanding of ancient Israelite Yahweh worship is that it started as a polytheistic or henotheistic religion where they also believed in these other gods. Yahweh was the brother of, I believe, Moloch. Yahweh was just the God of the Israelites. They fully acknowledged that these other gods existed too.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool and interesting that you believe that. Most Christians tend to think these other gods are either demons or non-existent altogether.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. They're especially the Trinitarians. They're strictly monotheistic, but that's just contradictory to the Bible, I believe. Unless you're I think the term is polytheistic, monotheistic polyism. I think that's a term. It sounds super crazy, but I'm pretty sure that's a term where you again acknowledge the existence of other gods, but only believe in one God.
Now, this might be a good. I don't know if there's more on morality you wanted to visit before we moved on to our next topic of contradictions.
Yes, we could do contradictions right now. This is my
Sure.
favorites.
Yeah. Did you have a specific contradiction that I brought up in one of my videos that you wanted to address?
I could never remember them, so you can address them all right now.
Sure. I don't know if I'll be able to remember the exact reference. There's one contradiction I think is, here it is. There's one that's pretty blatant, I think. It has to do with Jairus' daughter being brought back to life by Jesus. So the story goes, Jairus is a man who approaches Jesus and says, my daughter is about to die. She needs to be saved. Help her. And then on the way to go help her, somebody finds Jairus and says, your daughter has died. And then Jesus goes and brings the girl back to life. But in another version, in a different gospel, when Jairus approaches Jesus, he already is convinced that his daughter is dead. And then he says, could you bring her back to life? So the contradiction lies in, when did Jairus find out his daughter was dead? Was it before he asked Jesus for help or after he asked Jesus for help? I found the verses if you want to look them up too.
Sure.
One of them is Mark 5, starting in verse 21.
Okay.
The other one is Matthew 9, starting in verse 18.
Okay, you have Matthew 9 written down already, right? So we can read this one, and then you have that one written down. Then you just say we can go to that one.
Yeah, I've got Matthew 9 open.
Okay. So from Mark chapter 5, verse 21, correct?
Yes.
Jesus got on the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, his name was Jairus, arrived when he saw Jesus and fell at his feet, pleading fraternally with him. My little daughter is dying. He said, please come and lay your hands on her. Jesus went with him, and the people followed, crowding around him. The woman in the crowd had suffered 12 years of constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from the many doctors and over the years, and she had spent everything she had to do to pay them. But she has gotten no better.
Can I
In fact,
pause
she
you
has
really
gotten
quick?
worse.
The parts that you're reading now are a little irrelevant to the story. Let's
Oh,
skip
okay.
ahead to what you started with is perfect. Let's skip ahead to verse 35.
All right. Verse 35. But when he said, still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the house of Jairus, and the leader of the synagogue, they told him, your daughter is dead. There is no troubling to the teacher now. And Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, do not be afraid, just have faith.
That's a fine stopping point. That's perfect. So
Thank
what
you.
we read was that Jairus approaches Jesus and says, "My daughter is dying." Other
Dying.
translations say about to die. And then later, Jairus finds out that his daughter has died. And
Now you said Matthew.
the news is troubling to him. And then the other one is Matthew 9. I can read this one starting in verse 19 or 18.
You said
While he
Matthew
was Matthew 9. While he was
9.
saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt. The synagogue leader is Jairus. I believe this passage doesn't mention Jairus' name. The synagogue
Oh
leader
wait, you
came
said
and
Matthew
knelt.
chapter 9 verse.
18.
Okay, I read it.
I'll read it. While he was saying this, a synagogue leader, who is Jairus, knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died. Please come and put your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. That's pretty much it. That's all the relevant points. So,
Okay, I think two things here. Number one, the name of Jairus isn't mentioned here, but that's completely fine. We're gonna assume that this is Jairus. There's no problem with admitting that Jairus isn't mentioned here. Okay.
great. Yeah, most scholars agree that this is the same, referring to the same event.
Now we go to Mark. It was Mark chapter 8, correct? Correct.
5.
5. You said
Yeah,
Mark
and
chapter 8, verse 5?
Mark chapter 5.
Okay, Mark
Uh,
chapter 5,
the relevant verse is actually verse 22. Sorry, 23.
22,
My
23.
little daughter is dying.
My little daughter is dying. He said, please come lay your hands on her so she can live. Okay.
Yeah, in other translations, Mark 5:23 says, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. My little daughter is dying. My daughter is about to die. My little daughter is at death's door. My little daughter is very sick. So this all gives us the impression that she is still alive, but she's about to die. And then later, on their way to his house, the Pharisees or whoever come and tell Jairus that his daughter died.
Okay, so this is verse 23. I'm gonna look at the couple of versions. You you have the understandable version?
Understandable version? I don't know that translation.
Okay, do you have um let's see. How many do you have right now that you can read?
For which verse? Matthew 9?
For no, Mark chapter 5 verse 23.
I have every translation open.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, just read a couple of them for me.
I'm on Bible Gateway. So, yeah, I read a few already. Here's some more. My little daughter is near death, is dying, lies at the point of death, is almost dead, is dying. I'm skipping some of the ones that are the same. My daughter's going to die. My daughter is at the point of mavet, at the point of death, near death, is dying, at the point of death, is dying. My daughter is nigh dead, which means near dead. My little
Okay.
daughter is at the last extremity.
Then we
Now
then
let's
we can admit in Mark that she's definitely not died. She's not dead. Then we can admit that in Mark. Now
yeah,
Matthew,
perfect. Now
Matthew.
in Matthew, I'm happy to compare a couple of different translations. My daughter is even now dead. Uh, my daughter has just now died. My daughter has just now died.
Now the chapter and verse. What was it again?
Matthew 9:18.
Matthew 9:18.
My daughter is now deceased. My daughter just died.
And Jesus said this to the leader of the synagogue that came up before him. My daughter had just died. Okay, so yeah, we can see this is definitely the leader of the synagogue is Jairus, because right after this it shows the woman with the constant bleeding. So we can already skip past that, right?
Yeah, the lady who has touched Jesus' cloak is irrelevant to the contradiction.
I know it's irrelevant. So what the argument I would say, because I have not read this contradiction yet, what I would say is that the Gospels, as you know, they're eyewitnesses from two different people, two different accounts. So one gospel or one eyewitness account is not going to say exactly the same as another one. It's like if me and you witnessed a car crash, you can mention the things of the car crash that maybe I don't mention. Like I could say that the person died because they were on their phone, or you could probably say that the person died because of the traffic light.
Now, you are correct in pointing out that two eyewitnesses could retell an event and
Different.
contradict each other because they remember things incorrectly. But in the case of here, what's really going on, first of all, neither of these Gospels was written by an eyewitness. Matthew and Mark were both written by anonymous authors decades after the events took place based on hearsay.
They were still in the first century. It's not decades. The dating of the Gospel of Mark and Matthew are in the first century.
The first century is decades after the events is still within the first century. So you're right in saying it's in the first century, but
okay. But let me ask you this, right? You know that they were young men when they encountered Jesus in their lifetime, right? The only person that was majorly old was John. If me and you, or I'm sorry, I keep saying me and you, if I witness something at the age of 10, but I write a book about it or I talk about it at the age of 40, 60, does my testimony now become invalid? Did I not witness what I saw just because I'm writing it years later?
Well, we have no reason to think that the authors of Matthew and Mark are Matthew and Mark. And I just Googled when scholars believe both of these books were written. And Matthew was between year 80 and 90 AD. And then Mark was between 70 and 75 AD. So the earliest of these two was in the year 70, which if we assume that this event at the latest took place in the year like 30, that's still 40 years after the event took place. And we have no reason to believe that it was actually written by Mark or Matthew.
But like I said, it's still right. It's still written in the first century. It's not like these writers wrote this in the second century or another writer wrote this in the second century. It's still in the century where Jesus lived in, closer to his life, because scholars agree that Jesus lived in the first century, died roughly around 33 AD, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, it's the point is, it doesn't matter how long. If these events occurred in their early lifetime and they wrote it later when they were adults, it's not like you can't just take away that they didn't see what was happening.
Well, you are correct in pointing out that the timeline makes sense that you're saying. Somebody potentially could be with the event and then write about it 40 years later. I'm not saying that that's impossible. What I'm saying is that we have no reason to think these books were written by Matthew or Mark, but that's actually not even really that relevant, because what you're really appealing to is that these people remembered the event differently, and they're both saying two contradictory and mutually exclusive claims about the event.
I was just saying that maybe these two, maybe Mark is the one that says that she's dead, correct? Or is it Matthew? Matthew's the one that says she's dead?
Yeah, Matthew says she's dead.
Okay, Matthew, maybe when Jairus came to Jesus, and you would obviously, if your daughter is dying or is dead, what would be the reaction? It would be in a panic or in a you're fearing, right? You have fear.
I have experienced fear.
Okay. No, but I'm saying like in this situation, correct? If your daughter was dying or died, you would be anxious, you would be scared, you'd be sad. Maybe maybe I don't know. I don't know you, but you could be yelling, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we're going by that, maybe the author, or I'm sorry, the eyewitness Matthew, he saw these expressions by Jairus, and he himself he interpreted as saying that she was dead by the way that he was speaking, and then Mark took it a different way.
Let's for a second, but for the sake of argument, just for now, I'll concede that these gospels were written by eyewitnesses. But just for the record, I don't actually believe that. If these two eyewitnesses interpreted what they saw differently and wrote down two contradictory claims, they both cannot be right. They're making claims about reality that can't be true at the same time. She can't be dead and alive at the same time. Jairus can't believe she's dead and alive at the same time. So what you're appealing to is one of the gospel witnesses misinterpreted what he saw and wrote down a lie. And that's fine if you want to believe that, but that doesn't excuse the contradiction. And you have to admit these two passages are in contradiction with each other.
Okay, then we can agree on that part.
Great. All right, cool. Well, I'm happy to convince you that the Bible has at least one contradiction. Here's another more straightforward one if we want to do just one more contradiction. Let's see. This one, I'm going to have to look up the passage. It had to do with a census taken by King David.
Okay.
One of the passages was in, here we go, 2 Samuel 24. The other one is 1 Chronicles 21.
2 Samuel 24, and then what would the verse be?
Verse 9.
Verse 9. Joab reported the number of the people to the kings. There were, okay, I know this one. 800,000 compatible warriors in Israel who could handle a sword, and 500,000 in Judea.
Yeah, so in First Chronicles, the same story is told, and the results of here we go. Yeah, in First Chronicles 21, the results of the census are totally different. It says the total number in Israel was 1.1 million, or 1,100,000 men, and Judah had 470,000. Now, in this figure, the 1.1 million includes both Israel and Judah. So if we subtract 70,000 from 1.1 million, we get 640,000, I believe.
He said First Chronicles chapter 21, what verse?
Verse 5.
And the number of the people to David, there were 1,100,000 warriors in all in Israel who could handle a sword, and 470,000 in Judea. So the numbers 1,100,000 warriors here, 400. Now this is First Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5.
Oh, 470.
470.
Sorry, I'm just doing math. I should have done this ahead of time. But yeah, if we take, there's already a contradiction in the number given in, I was right, 630,000. Yeah, so there's a contradiction in both of the results, the Israelite population and the Judah population. So according to First Chronicles, Israel has 630,000 men, Judah has 470,000, and of course those numbers are drastically different in 2 Samuel 24.
Okay,
which
so
is 800,000.
I saw in First Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5. I checked the versions. They 100%. The numbers are correct here. Now you said 2 Samuel.
Yeah, 2 Samuel verse 9, where it's 800,000 men in Israel and 500,000 in Judah. So
Second
there's a
Samuel.
130,000 men difference in the Israelite population and a 530.
You said Second Samuel verse 9, chapter 9.
2 Samuel 24 verse 9.
2 Samuel 24 verse 9.
Basically, the long and short of it is the numbers are different, so they're in contradiction with each other.
Okay, so in verse 9 it says that there were 800,000 warriors, capable warriors in Israel who could handle a sword, and
Yep.
500,000 in Judea. The word capable warriors here is going to be, you can use it for both in Israel and in Judea. The capable warriors in Israel. It's for both in Israel and Judea.
You're talking about First Chronicles, right?
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Second. This is 2 Samuel 24 verse 9.
Oh, you're saying, so in Israel there's 800,000 able-bodied men, and in Judah 500,000. You're saying the 800,000 includes the 500,000 from Judah?
No, I'm saying that the capable warriors in this quotation, I'm quoting it, capable warriors there's going to be 800,000 capable warriors in Israel, and there's going to be 500,000 capable warriors in Judea.
Right. And in First Chronicles, it says the same thing. The number, the thing that we're counting is men who can handle a sword. So
now, if we go to First Chronicles, right? What was the chapter and verse again? I'm sorry.
First Chronicles 21, verse 5. In Israel, there were 1,100,000 men who could handle a sword, including 470,000 in Judah.
Okay. Now it's going to be a little bit different here, because it says here in verse 5, the total number of children of the children of Israel, who was 1,100,000 footmen who drew the sword, and the tribe of Judah was 470,000 men who drew the sword. So again, we're using the word who drew the sword here for Israel and Judea. So the number that's going to be said for the men who drew the sword in Israel is going to be such and such, and then you're going to apply that to Judea as well. The word who drew a sword. So the difference is that these are the people who drew the sword. That's the number of the warriors who drew the sword, and then in the other verse is going to be the number of the people, the capable warriors. That would be the difference. Capable warriors and who drew the sword. Verse 5, there's a lot of versions, including the manuscript, that said who drew the sword. It's somebody who draws the sword.
So you're saying that the two censuses that we're reading are actually counting different things. One of them is anyone who can pick up a sword, and the other one is people who can pick up a sword and use it well. Is that what you're saying?
I would word it a little bit more differently, but we can go with that definition.
Okay, well, I would definitely contest that. I think the two verses are clearly talking about the same thing. In other translations, in the NIV, for example, in 2 Samuel 24, it says the number of fighting men to the king. And then later, in the same verse, it says men who can handle a sword. And then in First Chronicles, the number of fighting men to David, the number of men to the king, is what it said in the other passage, men who can handle a sword. So both of them in this translation, NIV says men who can handle a sword.
Well, there's more versions of the verse. Like, for example, this one, it says who are able to take up arms. The context of this verse in First Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5 are the people who can either handle a sword or draw it. As in, for the other one, it's fighting men. I think this argument.
What's the difference between fighting men and men who can handle a sword? What's the difference?
The counting of it. There's one census that counts the fighting men, the men who are the capable warriors, and there's the census here are the men who draw the sword, who take out the sword. So you can be a fighting warrior and not take out the sword.
So in 2 Samuel, the number for both Israel and Judah is higher than in First Chronicles. You're saying that if I'm counting these Israelites, you're saying I could count this person as, okay, you're an able-bodied man, you're an able-bodied man, but you're not going to count towards the able-bodied men who pick up a sword because you can't pick up a sword. I still don't understand the difference. If you see a man who looks to be in his 20s, how do you tell which group of people to put him in?
How do I know what group of people to put him in?
Yeah, let's say you see what looks like an able-bodied man, maybe someone that looks like me or you. I don't know what you look like, but I'm assuming you're a young guy. But let's say you see someone like me.
Okay.
How do you know if I'm an able-bodied man or an able-bodied man who can handle a sword?
Well, because really in the First of Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5, if we go to the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Aleppo Codex, it's somebody who's already drawn the sword.
What it says in the NIV translations, both of them use the exact same phrase, men who can handle a sword.
Well, then this argument is just going to be something where we're going to be going back and forth with the versions of the Bible.
Well, with respect, I think you might be being uncharitable with what it's saying. I think you're drawing a distinction between these two types of men without a justification.
Well, the justification is that in Samuel it says capable warriors, and then here is the men who take out the sword. It's differentiating the two groups. If it wasn't talking about two different groups, it wouldn't use the words drawing a sword and capable warriors. It's a distinction of two groups.
For these particular passages, you're looking at a translation which uses a different phrase. My translation uses the same phrase. This might be a situation where we have to go back to the original Hebrew and see if it uses the exact same word or not.
Okay. Like I said, I use the Dead Sea Scrolls or I use the Aleppo Codex.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm Googling I don't know if it's in Hebrew, I assume it's in Hebrew. I'm Googling the Hebrew for both of these two verses from First Chronicles and from Second Samuel. Let's see, I've got First Chronicles open first. It says, men who drew the sword.
Okay,
it says, is so left had Beb. And then
then it's talking about men who draw the sword.
And then in 2 Samuel, it says, men valiant who drew the sword. Is ha-yil, so left ha-reb. So the only difference between these in the original translation is the word valiant. So you are correct in pointing out that the original Hebrew is actually not quite the same in both translations.
Yes.
In 2 Samuel, it adds the word valiant.
Yes.
Now,
that would be the difference of the two groups.
Now here's something. Let's throw a wrench in here. So those valiant men we have two groups: men who can draw a sword and valiant men who can draw a sword. Now, valiant seems like it's a limiting characteristic. Like if both groups can draw swords, but this group is valiant, so we expect it to be a smaller group, right?
Yes.
Right, but in 2 Samuel, that's the bigger of the two translations. So in 2 Samuel, the numbers are higher than those in First Chronicles. So there's more valiant men who can draw a sword than there are men who can draw a sword which may or may not be valiant. So that's the exact opposite of what we would expect. If
so you said
valiant,
you said that there's more men who are valiant who can draw the sword?
Yes. So 2 Samuel is the one that uses the word valiant, and that's the census which has a bigger number, 800,000, 500,000 versus 630,000 and 470,000. So
I don't think there's not a problem. I don't think there's a problem at all there. I think the majority of the Israel, the majority would be the men with, the valorized men.
If there's two groups that are capable of holding a sword, One group includes valiant men and non-valiant men. The other groups include just valiant men. The group that includes valiant and non-valiant men, we would expect to be bigger than the group that only has one of those subsets, correct?
The one with the valiant men who would draw the sword or draw the sword, I would assume for that one to be bigger.
You would assume the valiant men group is bigger, but the other group includes valiant men and non-valiant men. So wouldn't that group be bigger?
You said which one is the one that includes valiant and non-valiant? Read it again.
So First Chronicles is men who can draw a sword. Second Samuel is valiant men who can draw a sword.
Men who can draw a sword it doesn't say valiant men there. You see,
right.
That's what I'm talking about with the...
What I'm saying is that valiant is a subset, a smaller group of those who can draw a sword. So let's say there's 800,000 total men in Israel, but only amongst those men who can draw a sword, those 800,000 men, only 630,000 of them are valiant men. But that's the opposite of what we see. In the text, we see the bigger group is the one that includes only valiant men, and the smaller group is the one that includes both valiant and non-valiant men. Can you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I can understand it, but I just personally believe that the army of Israel, who is I don't know I don't know if it was the King Saul or either the King David who was in charge of them. Regardless, it doesn't matter who it was. I think it was David. Okay.
Yeah.
So since it was David, regardless, it doesn't matter. But I think that the people who are not the men who are not valiant, it would be a lesser group than the ones who are. You're right. There's still two are still taking out the sword, but the ones who are valiant, I just think it makes more sense for that to be a higher group. No. Why would the non-violent ones be a higher group? It doesn't really make sense for an army.
Because the group that the non-valiant group isn't just men who can draw a sword who aren't valiant. This is a group that includes both valiant and non-valiant men. Because this group, the only requirement to be in this group is you can hold a sword. But in the valiant group, it's men who can hold a sword and are valiant. So if we're adding another stipulation, another requirement to be a part of this other group, we would expect it to shrink the size of the group. Because the group, if your only requirement is that you can hold a sword, that group is going to be bigger than men who can hold a sword and are valiant. We're adding a second layer of stipulation onto who counts towards the group.
But it doesn't say that in the text that both of them are valiant. It says, I think, both of them, I'll agree on this one. I don't know if we're going to eventually agree. They both agree. We both agree that they're taking out the sword. They're drawing the sword.
Uh-huh.
But one group is just called Valorant. Both of them are still taking out the group, but one is called Valorant and the other one is not.
Do you think that there's any men who fall into both groups?
Any men who fall into both groups? No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's where our disconnect is. Because my interpretation is that if you can, where it says men who can hold a sword, and it makes no requirement that you're valiant or not, to me that would be anyone who could hold a sword. So if you are valiant, you would fall under the category of people who can draw a sword. So we would expect the other group, the group who can draw a sword and are valiant, to be smaller, because now there's two requirements to be a part of the group instead of just one.
So you're saying that there can be a group who does not draw the sword and can be valiant?
No, I'm saying that both groups have, one group has one requirement and one group has two requirements. The requirement that both groups share is that you can hold a sword and you're a man.
You're asking if there can be a middle?
No, I'm trying to say that one group, all of the men who are valiant and can hold a sword are in both groups. But then there's extra men.
But the text doesn't say that. The text only says one of them are valiant and the other one isn't. You can't. It doesn't say that in the text that both are.
It doesn't say that one group is not valiant. It says these are the men who can handle a sword. It
But
doesn't make
if
any
if the word is
requirement that they're
not there,
valiant
then
or not.
we're not going to apply it to the scripture. If the word isn't there, we're not just going to throw it in there. If it doesn't say valiant, right, then we're not just going to add it into the scripture.
Well, you're adding in something else. You're adding in a stipulation that they're not valiant. So you're
Because the
saying,
text doesn't say it. That's why the
but
text doesn't say it.
we're not safe to assume that if you can't be valiant to be in this group. That's what you're saying. You're adding an extra layer that the text doesn't even say. So my interpretation of the text is that anyone who can hold a sword is part of this group, because that's what it says. But your interpretation is anyone who can hold a sword and is not valiant is like bad at holding a sword. So we're counting all the men in the whole nation who can hold a sword but suck at using it. And to me, that's a ridiculous interpretation of the text, which you would never arrive at unless it was for this other verse, which you're trying to avoid having a conflict with this one.
I can come to get your interpretation, but I just think if it's not said in the text, I'm not going to go far from what is written. It's just like what Paul said. Don't go beyond for what is written in the scripture. If the group isn't classified as valiant men and another one is, why should I automatically apply that this one is now if the text doesn't say that they are?
Because it doesn't make a distinction of whether they are or aren't. So I would interpret it to mean they could be valiant or they could not be valiant. But you're saying they're
That's completely
definitely
fine. That's completely fine. Like I said, I can go by that interpretation, but I just think, me personally, if it's not said in the text, I'm not going to go beyond from what it says.
from my standpoint, that's exactly what you're doing, and I'm not doing that because you're adding a stipulation that to be in this group, you're not allowed to be valiant. And it also makes no sense why David would bother taking a census of Israel if all he's counting is non-valiant men who could hold a sword. What is the point of
Maybe
counting
that's
that?
maybe that's the way David just counted it. We don't know.
It seems very pointless to even want to find out
Maybe
how
it
many
seems
people.
pointless. Maybe it seems pointless to you, but maybe for the King David, it was important for him at the time, writing the census.
He wants to know how many people can hold a sword but are not good at using it.
That's perfectly normal.
I would say that that's very ridiculous, but I don't think we're going to see eye to eye on this one, so maybe
That's
we
fine.
should move on. The last thing that you wanted to talk about was, is the Bible the Word of God?
Yeah,
So,
I was gonna provide scripture, use historical analysis to do that, or yeah.
well, we could probably skip Scripture, because if the Bible says that the Bible is the Word of God, that's a circular argument, so that's
That's
completely
not what I was gonna
worthless.
do. A lot of people think that's what I'm going to do, but that's not what I was gonna do. I was gonna provide the
Okay, yeah,
prophecies
sure.
in the Bible.
By all, oh, sure, yeah. By all means, do whatever you want to do. Let's go for it.
Okay, great. So the first one I want to go to is Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Now, note, before we're reading this, the book of Isaiah was written 700 years before Christ. Just to note
Okay.
that. So now let's go to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. You can read it if you want.
Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and call him Emmanuel.
Now, this is too specific for it to be any person. You can't, and I don't want to, and I'm not going to say that this is a coincidence either for how specific it is.
Now,
I don't
I
go by
agree.
coincidences.
I agree that it's not a coincidence, but let's consider this for a moment.
Okay.
Since this verse was written, you said 700 years before the New Testament or before Jesus lived.
Yes.
One possible explanation for how the Jesus story fulfills this prophecy is that the
Mm-hmm.
author of the gospel had access to this prophecy and made up details to add to the story in order to fulfill it.
Well, this is why we can go. Do you have the, I don't know if you have it on you for the book of Isaiah. Do you have the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I mean, I have Google open on my computer. I can look
You
anything up.
can, if you want to, we can go. I can give you um, three manuscripts we can go to. You can either go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Leningrad, or the Aleppo Codex. One of these you can go to.
Before before we do, one more note about this particular verse is that when it says virgin, what the Hebrew word actually means is young woman. So when the author of the gospel story was making up Jesus's birth, they added in the whole Virgin Mary bit because they were intentionally trying to fulfill a prophecy, but they were fulfilling a prophecy that was actually based on a mistranslation. They thought
I know
virgin meant,
you're gonna bring this up.
they think that virgin means a woman who's never had sex, but in the original Hebrew, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means a girl who is young, but she may have had sex because virgin in this language doesn't have that meaning that it did in the
Yes.
Greek or whatever translation he was.
Yes. Now I knew you were gonna bring this up, and I have the definition here. It's al-mach. That's what the Hebrew word is here. Al-mach. The very first definition you have here is a veiled or a private. I don't know if you know this, but women in the Old Testament, when they were virgins, they used to put on veils.
When you say when they were virgins, do you mean when they were young women or before they got sex
Women
for the first time?
who had not sex, women who did not have sex.
What if they took their veil off, but they still hadn't had sex?
Well, the Bible doesn't mention that. It just means that women who are veiled in the Old Testament, they would be the virgins. They veil themselves. That's all the Bible says.
Could there be a woman who had sex and wore the veil anyway because she didn't want to admit that she had sex?
Maybe the Bible doesn't say it, but I'm not denying it.
Sure, it's physically possible for a girl to lie about having sex, right?
Possible.
Okay.
Also, there's another one here, damsel, which is which would be the young woman. A lot of people mention this also. A young woman could have sex or not have sex. It's not throwing away the part that it could be a virgin or not. You understand that, right?
Yeah, that's fine by me. But if a woman conceives and gives birth to a son, we would expect that this woman had sex because every example we have of anyone ever being born was born from a woman who had sex. Through IVF.
Well, that's the thing, though. For this to work, a virgin, it says that she's gonna conceive while being a virgin. And another thing I want to add on to this, right? I'm gonna finish the definitions here. A maid, a lot of maids, they did not have children or servants. Remember, we were going over the servants and the slaves in the Bible.
Yeah.
A lot of the servants in the Old Testament did not have children for obvious reasons. But the argument is a maid could have sex or not have sex again. And then the last one is virgin. But the last one I kind of want to wrap up here is the word Emmanuel. The word Emmanuel means God with us. Now, here's the thing, though. If let's say this is somebody who's totally this is not Jesus, right? Let's just assume coincidence, another, right? It's not no virgin birth, nothing like that. There's nobody in the Old Testament that we can provide that has the name of Emmanuel. It's only it's only Isaiah speaking of the prophecy of the child that's going to be called Emmanuel, God with us. There's nobody in the Old Testament that's called Emmanuel. It's almost like the title is only exclusively for this prophecy of this child.
Yeah, so what's stopping someone who's writing the New Testament just from making stuff up in order to fulfill this prophecy?
You said, what is stopping somebody from writing this down just to fulfill the New Testament prophecy?
What's stopping the authors of the New Testament from making up things in order to fulfill a prophecy that they have access to in the Old Testament?
Now, are you talking about the New Testament or the Old Testament? Like, what New Testament authors? Yes.
So when the New Testament authors were writing down the story of Jesus' birth, or any story, they had access to Isaiah and all these prophecies in the Old Testament. So what's stopping them from making up things in order to fulfill prophecy?
Because historically, the Jews, they already had the Torah. The only thing that wasn't compiled yet was the gospel. The gospel was compiled in the 4th century. A lot of people don't know this. The books of the Bible were already written in the 1st century. They just weren't compiled yet. The Torah was already there. The Torah was already written.
That's exactly
and the Jews
saying.
The Jews, historically, they already had the Torah, and the Torah was, compiled a little bit earlier to the. It's a coincidence how earlier it is to the gospel, which makes the argument a little bit worse. But it was written roughly a little bit earlier than the gospel, and we had this text down, which is Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah, well, maybe you missed my question because what you just said seems to just solidify my suspicion that the author of the New Testament lied and made things up in order to fulfill prophecies that he had access to in the Old Testament. So let's pretend I'm writing down the New Testament. I'm the author of Matthew or whatever. And I open up the book of Isaiah, which I have access to because it's already been written. I see Isaiah 7:14. So I say, oh, I want my Jesus story to fulfill this prophecy so that 2,000 years later, people will read what I write and say, oh, this must be the word of God because it fulfills prophecy. So what's stopping me from lying and just making up whatever I want to fulfill the prophecy that I have access to and I can read in Isaiah?
Because the book of Isaiah, right, was written 700 years before Christ, and the book, wait, I know you're already doing the face, but the book, we had this book, the Isaiah, when the Dead Sea Scrolls was compiled, and we know this was in the they discovered it roughly. It's a time passed from BC to AD, so this text was already there before the Gospels. That's why the text was already there. The texts were already there. We already had access to this. The Torah was made a book. The Torah was made a book way before the Gospels.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So maybe you're missing my question.
But the text was already written down. If the text was already written down and it says the virgin will conceive a child, would let's say in Hebrew, like the Azmach will conceive a child and will give birth to Emmanuel. We have that from the BC when the book was already written.
Right. So then, since we have that already,
yes,
or we write down the gospel, if I'm the gospel author, I could make something up in order to fulfill the prophecy.
But the Jews didn't believe. The Jews didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah.
Well, the author of the Gospels evidently did, right? Because they wrote a story where
but here's the problem.
A virgin gave birth to him.
The Gospel Christians, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, correct?
Welcome everyone to hour number 3 of our debate today.
Time.
Yeah. So this will probably be my last hour. We'll end sometime before the next 60 minutes are up. But you were talking. I had asked you what's stopping the gospel authors from lying and making stuff up since they had access to Isaiah.
Yes. So what my point was that the Bible that we have, people say the Protestant Bible, the Christian Bible, any Bible, right? It composites the New Testament and the Old Testament.
Yes.
The Jews, they only have the Torah. So if we go to the Torah, the Dead Sea, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls is a Jewish Bible. They don't believe in the New Testament. They don't believe in the Jewish Messiah being Christ. Now, with this being said, why would they themselves incorporate the text, the virgin will conceive a child and name Emmanuel, if they don't believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah? And they don't believe in the New Testament.
Well, like you said, Isaiah was written before Jesus was born, long before Jesus was born. The Jews believe that the Messiah is still yet to come. So they don't believe Jesus was the Son of God. They think that he doesn't fulfill the prophecy.
Exactly.
So I don't know if I don't think that answers my question.
No.
The gospel.
Jesus. Okay. How about let me restate this again. Christians believe that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah in the Old Testament. Jews do not, because they rejected him when he came here. But if you read the Old Testament, there is a mentioning of a son, and we believe that Jesus, when it talks about the prophecies of Jesus, is very, very detailed to what Jesus had been through. We make, and with the New Testament, addition to that, we believe that Jesus is the Old Testament Messiah. The Jews were, at the time of Isaiah, they were already awaiting the Messiah. They were already awaiting the Messiah. They didn't know who the Messiah was. They did know. A lot of people I know a lot of people after this, they're gonna be really weird that I said this. They knew God had a son. They already knew God had a son. because Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4 says it. They already knew God had a son. They just didn't know his name was Jesus, nor did they know, because Jesus was a name given to him on the earth. They didn't know that they didn't know that his name was Jesus. They didn't know that Jesus was the prophesied Messiah. The only thing that they knew at the time, now they know that it's going to be another Messiah, not Jesus. But at the time, they were still awaiting this Messiah, who they had no idea who it was.
The question that we're trying to answer is, how do we know the Bible is the Word of God? And you're pointing to a prophecy given in the Old Testament, which is fulfilled in the New Testament.
Yes.
And that's evidence that the Bible is the Word of God.
Yes. But if you want, we can just skip past that one. No. We can skip past that
Well,
one. That was just one I wanted to give you. There's no other. The virgin birth is coincidentally here, and then also the name of Emmanuel. Coincidentally, it's only talk about Emmanuel that's prophesied in the Old Testament. There's nobody named Emmanuel except for this prophesied person in the Old Testament. That's that. But if you want, we can brush past this one. We can go to the other ones.
It doesn't really matter what the specific prophecy is. Any prophecy given in the Old Testament fulfilled in the New Testament is going to be not impressive in the slightest degree, because the authors of the New Testament can make up whatever they want to fulfill the Old Testament. It would only be impressive if the authors did not have access to the Old Testament, but because they could read them, they could just lie and make stuff up. So there's nothing that the New Testament could say in reference to the Old Testament that would be impressive remotely. It would be like an author making a sequel to a book. Like if George R.R. Martin ever finishes The Winds of Winter, and it's like, oh, look at all these references he has to a Game of Thrones. And it's like, well, he has access to that book. So it's no wonder he can reference it. You know, I mean, no, that's not a great example because it's the same author for both books. But let's say that he's referencing, I don't know, the Iliad or some old book. He has access to it, so it doesn't mean that it's the Word of God.
Yes. Now, wrapping up, we have 2 more verses here, and then me and you can go, you can do whatever you want. The last 2 verses, I'm going to composite history now. We're not going to use the New Testament. We're going to use history.
Perfect.
But before we end off, the last part that you said that we don't know if the New Testament authors went inside the Old Testament, I just want to clarify. I don't think this is possible because the Old Testament, the Jews right now, they have the Talmud and they have other Jewish books. Why would they keep this verse, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, that talks about a virgin birth and her conception being called Emmanuel? Why would they keep this knowing that Jesus is not the Messiah? And adding to that question, the Dead Sea Scrolls was found, right? The writings is dated back to BCE, historical BC, before Christ, BCE. The Jews, they had no idea who Jesus was. It was 700 years before, and the Jewish Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, because the New Testament didn't come out. Either way, if we're gonna talk about today, why would they keep it in there in many Jewish Bibles if they do not believe Jesus is the Hebrew Messiah? And then number 2, if this text was dated back to BCE, and they had no idea who Jesus was, why would they still just throw it in there as Jews, as a conception, Emmanuel, and virgin birth?
Okay, so to the first part of your question, why don't the Jews take this verse out of their Torah?
Yes.
So,
or Tanakh. The Torah is going to be the...
Well, for one thing, this verse existed in the Torah, like you said, for 700 years before the New Testament was written. So what you're saying is you would expect the Jews to all get together sometime after Jesus was born and say, hey, you know, this verse that we have, this prophecy we have in our Torah, seems like, you know, someone else wrote a book which seems to fulfill this prophecy, and they're using it as evidence for their God.
Or it could have been. It could have been after he died. I'm sorry. You can.
I was just going to say you're proposing that the Jews should have deleted this prophecy because of fear that people are going to use it to advocate on behalf of a different God. And I think it would be, for one thing, I don't know why Jews leave or don't leave things in their Bible, in their Torah. It seems like it's not quite as easy as you might think it is, just to delete a verse. Who's in charge of the Torah? This thing's existed for thousands and thousands of years. And if you delete a verse, people are still going to know it was there in the original, and they're going to be there's going to be
exactly the original. What I'm trying to say, right? They had the time period between now and before. The Jews before, correct? They had no idea who the Jewish Messiah was, and Isaiah 700 years before, the Dead Sea Scrolls, what encompasses the book of Isaiah BCE, they could have, easily. They had no idea who Jesus was. What's the point of putting a conception birth here, a virgin birth, if they had no idea who Jesus was? And then we're looking now to the Torah or the Tanakh. Jews, they had the time when Jesus died to up until now to say, no, we're not gonna, as Israel, it could have been Israel the nation, it could have been the government, it could have been anybody, it could have been rabbis. We're not gonna read it, or it has nothing to do with this. That's the point I was trying to get at.
To the second part of your question, if I understand it, why did they include this prophecy if they had no idea who Jesus was, because he wasn't born yet?
Yes.
That's like the whole point of a prophecy. Isaiah is filled with prophecies where the author is making predictions about the future, and they're vague enough that they can be interpreted in multiple different ways. But in the case of this prophecy, the authors of the New Testament made up details in their story in order to fulfill it. So, yeah, it's completely unremarkable that the New Testament fulfills any prophecy in the Old Testament, and I would not expect the Jews to all get together and collectively decide to delete a verse out of their Torah simply because someone else wrote a book that references theirs. It would be like if the Catholic Church today said, oh, we don't like this particular verse in the Bible, so we're just going to cut it out. We're going to change the Bible. I don't think changing the Torah or the Bible, while it has gone through some edits in the past, I don't think it's quite as easy as you make it seem to be. And the further along we get in history, the harder it becomes to change and edit verses because there's more and more copies out there. So in order to delete a verse, you've got to get every single copy of the entire Torah together and then, use whiteout. I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous proposition.
I like that you admitted it, that you said that they did not know Jesus. It's a prediction. And then the New Testament, they use this prophecy that the old authors used to encompass it in their new gospel. I like that you admitted that. But we could go to the historical verses I have now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'm going to read the verse, and then I'm going to provide the historical context of it instead of going to the New Testament.
Sure. What's the verse?
It's going to be Isaiah 53, the whole chapter. It's not a long chapter. It's only 12 verses. You can read the whole thing, and then go.
Well, I was just going to say I don't want to sit here and read the whole thing, even though it is kind of short. Let's take it piecemeal. Let's find. We can start reading it. Once we find one prophecy, then we can talk about that and then move on. Is that okay?
The whole chapter is basically a prophecy.
Can you summarize the whole thing for me?
Okay. Well, summarizing it, it's talking about a servant who was afflicted for not his own doing, but the doing of the rebellion of his people. Isaiah is a Hebrew, so he's talking about the Hebrews as a nation, Israel. And he was whipped. He was shut as a sheep. He did not talk at all. It says that he was taken out of the world. He was taken out, meaning he died, and that he divided his portion and poured it out. And he was a intercession for transgressors for their sins. Now, one atheist I want to quote, Bart Ehrman: the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life. You agree on this?
Sure.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now I want to quote. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said something. You just said
no, just drinking, just sipping.
That's okay.
It's vodka. Just kidding.
Yeah,
it's holy water.
Okay. I wanted to quote Mara Bar Cyprian. He wrote in the 73 AD.
You're saying that Isaiah 53 is a prophecy that's referring to Jesus, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I got excited when we were going to talk about history. I thought we were going to leave the Bible in order to talk about the.
I was gonna I'm sorry, I was gonna compensate the Bible, but then I was going to use historical like facts to back it up instead of using the Bible, like the New Testament. That's what I was gonna do. History, like history speaking, rather than the New Testament. That's what we were gonna do. So noted, Isaiah is still written 700 years before Jesus, and here I'm gonna quote Mara Bar Serpion, 73 AD. The Gospels were compiled in the Gospels were compiled in the 4th century. They didn't have a New Testament book. All they had in the 73 century, since the Bible was compositioned in the 4th century, they only had the Torah. And Mara Bar Serpion is a Greek. He's a Greek historian, a Roman historian, Greek. So it doesn't make sense he would, read the Torah or quote something from the Torah. He says here, since he studies history, he said, and I quote, he said, it's really long, but I'm just going to cut to the chase. It says, or the Jews by killing their wise king because their kingdom was taken away at that very time. The reason why I quote this from Merabar Sempion in 73 AD is because here, and when I summarize it, you could read the verses. It says that he was cut off for the rebellion of my people. Isaiah is a Jew, so he's talking about the Hebrews here. And Marabar Serpion here, who in 73 AD did not have the Gospels. I'm not sorry, not the Gospels. Did not have the Bible that was compiled until the 4th century. He only had the Torah. He quotes the Jews killing their wise king.
I skimmed through the chapter.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
let's say that Jesus was a real person who actually was crucified.
Yes.
Now, what the chapter seems to be really prophesizing is that someone will suffer, and their suffering will serve as an intercession for our sins.
Yeah.
Right. So nothing in history about Jesus' death points to it being a sacrifice for sin. So this could be used as a prophecy for anyone. We could say, "Oh, this person died."
But
So
the problem with that is because the chapter is too specific. And like I said, the historian here in 73 AD, he records, he says that the Jews by killing their wise king, the Jews killing their wise king. If we go back to the chapter, it says that he was cut off from the land for the rebellion of my people. And like I just told you, this historian did not have he didn't have the use of the Bible compiled because it was compiled in the 4th century. This is 1st century that he's writing.
what is it about Jesus' death on the cross, assuming that happened, that is exclusively tied to Isaiah 53?
Exclusively tied is when it says he was cut off for the rebellion of my people. He was killed because of the Jews. That's one. Another one is where it says he was wounded for our transgressions. I'm sorry, that's the same thing. I don't know why I said that. There's one right here where it says he was dumb, meaning he did not speak at all. As a sheep, he did not open his mouth. I could say that one, but that's just found in the New Testament, and I know where you're right.
But Jesus
But
did speak, right?
no, when he was brought to his accusers, he didn't.
Right. Okay.
So yeah,
That's
these are just
that particular detail in the story of Jesus's crucifixion is in the Bible and not necessarily a part of history, or we have no reason to believe it's actually
I know
true.
that's why I didn't want to mention it. But the only mention here is when he was cut off for the transgressions, or he was killed for the Hebrews. And we have there's a lot of historians. I just mentioned this one in particular because he really mentions it in a way that's like a good way of saying it. He says, or the Jews by killing their wise king. It can't just be a normal person because it was a king. Jesus was called the king of the Jews. And it says the Jews by killing their wise king. That means the Hebrews, now rejecting Jesus, ultimately want him to be dead, crucified. And yeah, that's what we're gonna. If you want to add on to that.
Well, I guess what I'm seeing in this verse is like this person is going to suffer and be an atonement for everybody's sin, even though he doesn't deserve it. And
Yes.
even at the time, the people that followed Jesus could point to this verse and say, you know, assuming that Jesus was a real person who died on the cross, they could say, look,
Yes.
they're killing our king. This fulfills the prophecy. But then it gets to the question of, how did the author of Isaiah know that this would happen? Were they influenced by God, or were they
Influenced
just
by God.
making stuff up and then it happened to correlate with something that actually happened in reality later on?
Well, I'm glad that you actually quoted this. You actually said this. Like I said before, me as a Christian, I don't point to coincidences. I believe you don't have to believe, but I believe that Isaiah was inspired by God to write that, and it's just super way too specific. If you read this entire chapter, it's too specific for it to be something that's written down and then later it happens. Way too specific. You're almost literally calling it a coincidence. Way too specific, the details that are said in the chapter.
Some of the really specific details, I think, may have been embellished in the New Testament. And the
Of course.
details, the story, the part of it, if you could call any of it an accurate prediction, seems to be some of the more mundane things. Like he suffered, he died, and he wasn't a bad guy. And
The
even
Roman
the fact that he wasn't a bad guy,
yeah.
that might be something that's
No, I agree with
embellished in
you,
the New
but
Testament
the
as well.
Roman historians, let's just, I agree with you, but going apart from Marabar, right? Flavio Cephos, Titus, it's a different Titus, not the one that invaded Jerusalem. All of them, they show this king who is, they say that's Jesus, who died. They all say first century before the Bible was compiled. They only had what was the Torah. They didn't have these books of the Gospels. They all account saying that Jesus was killed for the rebellion of people, or killed because of the Jews, and they also account Jesus, what he was being afflicted. Mara Barn doesn't do this, but Flavio Cephalus, he does quote Jesus being afflicted and wounded, pierced, which are all everybody knows that Jesus was pierced, whipped, and another one, yeah, pierced and whipped. These are things that are said in Isaiah and also said in the gospel. But yeah.
Some atheists may give me flack for saying this, but some of the things in this passage do seem to be in line with what we see in, again, assuming that Jesus' crucifixion actually happened. But then the question becomes, how did the author of Isaiah know that it would happen? Were they just making a random guess and they happened to be right by coincidence, or were they guided by God? You said you don't believe in coincidence. I think that it would be ridiculous to not believe in coincidences.
The coincidence here is just crazy. This crazy coincidence. The way that it's Isaiah, 700 years, that lived in Israel, who had remember, you're saying that he did this by himself. He wrote all this by himself. That this is writing down, and then later, 700 years after, or 1,000 years, because the birth. Remember, 700, 800 years after, historians, not only the New Testament, who write in the first century, write about exactly how he expresses it, or the crucifixion at all. The crucifixion, Isaiah didn't know. In Hebrew, the Romans are the ones that use the crucifixion. The Romans. How did Isaiah know that a person was going to be crucified in this exact way when Isaiah is living in 600 BCE in Israel, having no knowledge of Roman governors, know that a man who's going to be crucified just like this in Jerusalem by the Romans via crucifixion, and then on top of that, how did he know the details? Yes.
I was just going to ask, where in Isaiah 53 does it mention crucifixion? Are you referring to verse 5 when it says he was pierced for our transgressions?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's not a crucifixion. You could be pierced in a different way. You could be stabbed with a sword. In the next line, it says he was crushed for our iniquities. Jesus wasn't crushed. if Jesus was ran over by a steamroller instead of being hung on a cross,
Crush.
you could
It's
still.
not. It's not like a literal sense. The word crush is more like the way how they beat him. That's what it's trying to. Yeah.
So crushed isn't literal, but pierced is literal. But what I'm saying is that Jesus could die in a number of different ways, and then you could reinterpret this passage in order to keep it a fulfilled prophecy. So let's pretend for a second Jesus' head was smashed in like a pumpkin. You could say, look, it says he was crushed for our iniquities. So that's a fulfilled prophecy. But you're saying that part is metaphorical, but the pierced part in the same verse is literal. And I think the only reason you're doing that is because of the crucifixion via post hoc rationalization.
Okay. Last thing here, and then we can move on to the last one. This is good conversation. Thank you for
Yeah, of
letting me
course.
be on here. But I'm just gonna say this. I think that this whole chapter, the specific details, of course, like he did not talk at all. He was shut as a sheep. He was pierced. He um he was a righteous servant, obviously alluding to him not sinning. He was transgressed for my people. These are all things that some of them are in the New Testament. That's why I didn't want to go to that. But what's happening?
Oh, sorry, I just hit my headphones.
Oh,
Go on.
okay. Correct. And it's just crazy the way the author of Isaiah. Let's just forget about the part of the Bible. Flavio Cephalus, Titus, Satianus, and the one I quoted, Martyr Bar. These are historians in the first century. They had no knowledge of the Gospels because it was compiled in the fourth century. They only had the Torah. They were Roman historians. They had no reason. Flavius Cephalus was a Jew. Why would he believe that Jesus was doing all this? They all account Jesus' death. They'll account Marabar. He counts the rebellion, the Jews killing their wise king. Flavius Cephalus quotes him dying without a cause. Sutinus, he quotes Jesus dying under the Roman governor because of the Jews. I think those four evidences, the historical context, like I told you, the Gospels were incorporated in the fourth century. These historians saying they had no reason to believe this or even encompass it then, when most of them were Roman and one of them was a Jew.
I think the last thing I'll say about this passage is that while some of the details seem to be in line with the idea that Jesus died on a cross, the more specific details could have been embellished in the New Testament because of this particular passage. The fact that he was quiet like a lamb when he was brought before Pontius Pilate, the whole point of him dying for our sins, for our transgressions, even though he was innocent. These are all things that could have been added to the story after the fact by the author, which weren't true. And so really this passage could be fulfilled by anyone who died. And since Jesus had a big following of people, or presumably if he was a real person, had a big following of people at the time, people after the fact could use this passage and reinterpret the events that happened, the actual crucifixion. They could add details to it. They could embellish it in order to be a better fulfillment of this prophecy. So, yeah, that's my last 2 cents. But you said you had one other prophecy you wanted to mention, and then I think I'll have to wrap it up after that.
Yeah. Last one, Daniel chapter 9, verse 26.
I'm happy to read it.
Yes.
After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end. The desolations have been decreed.
You know that the word anointed one means Messiah. You know that, right? Or did you not know that before?
Okay.
Okay, so basically, number one, this is going to be the weakest point of this one. The Messiah being cut off, in the words of Bar Ehrman, the historical scholars. Jesus' death is as certain as any historical fact. But let's go away from that. Because remember, like you said, it could have been anybody who claimed to be the Messiah being cut off, right? So, coming off of that, let's read here in Daniel chapter 29, verse 6, after that. But the people of the ruler of the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. The sanctuary is the temple, the city and the temple. The city and the temple of ruler. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to ask what city was destroyed by the people of the ruler, and the ruler being, of course, Pontius Pilate of Rome, right?
No, it wasn't Pontius Pilate. It wasn't Pontius Pilate.
Who's the ruler?
The ruler here is going to be Titus.
Okay, and then which city was destroyed?
Jerusalem. Jerusalem and the temple.
Jerusalem was destroyed right after Jesus' crucifixion. That's what you're saying?
Yes, not right exactly after, a couple of years, but yeah, the temple and the city. Now, I want to read to you a couple of sources here. There's actually only two sources, but you can actually do your own research. This is Jewish history. You said what?
Let me check 1 second. I looked. When was Jerusalem destroyed? And it says 587 BC.
That's the first. That's the first destruction. There, you have to search up the second temple. That was it was destructed first, and then a second time.
Here's one. The siege of Jerusalem, 70 CE.
Exactly, right there. By the ruler Titus, who destroyed the city and the temple. That's why the Jews right now, they don't have a temple. The second temple was destroyed by Titus.
When it says, first of all, it's interesting, and it does seem to correlate with the prophecy. When we look at war will continue until the end.
Yeah.
When is the end? And the end of what?
I would say the end, because it was like a fire, like a Flavio Cephus. He quotes it. He was a witness after the destruction. He quotes it as like a battle, because they invaded Jerusalem. The end of the war, it would be Jerusalem against the Romans. I like that you admit, though, it correlates to the prophecy.
But of course, like with any prophecy, and this is an interesting one. I appreciate you bringing it up to me. I actually am not very familiar with this particular prophecy. But when it comes to this one, I guess with any prophecy, how do we know that the author was getting the information from a god? Couldn't it be a coincidence?
Because, well, of course, a lot of people believe in coincidence. I just think it's too... How does this person alone, Daniel, who is an ordinary man, how does he know, with no hope at all, that a Messiah was going to be killed, and then after the destruction of a temple and the city was going to happen after? That's too specific for that. Nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. Somebody prophesizing something like that, I don't think somebody can do that and then it happening like that. I just look at the details to show what type of prophecy we're dealing with here. A prophecy like that is absurd for it to happen exactly like that. Now, if you want to say that Daniel was some type of musician here, some type of foreteller, you could say that too.
I don't think I would use that as a justification. But it does seem like an interesting coincidence, which would be my interpretation. One other thing I'll ask about it, when it says after the 62 sevens, what are the 62 sevens referring to?
The 62 sevens, I believe the 62, well, in another version it says after the 62 weeks. I believe that's between the trial and the crucifixion of Jesus. If it's not that, it would be somewhere point between Jesus' ministry and then the Messiah's death. That's what I would allude to. But yeah, we can definitely wrap it up there.
Sure. Well, I'll do more research on Daniel 9 and see if I can tackle more information on that. Maybe I'll make a whole video about it, but who knows? But
You really never knew that?
I wasn't familiar with that prophecy.
Okay, then okay, that's good. Yeah,
But yeah, I'm. This has been a great conversation, Brandon. I appreciate you being respectful, kind, patient,
yeah,
providing me all of this time of yours,
yeah,
defending your points. We saw some cool areas where we agreed and disagreed on certain topics. I thought this was a pretty fruitful conversation.
yeah.
So yeah, maybe someday when you get a working camera, we could do another discussion about more topics regarding religion. If you're interested, I'd be happy to.
Of course, of course.
Sure. Well, and until then, I appreciate your time once again, and take it easy.
Thank you. God bless.
Of course. And may the flying spaghetti monster bless you too.
Okay.